I don't know if you remember where you were 22 years ago. That's if you were born, of course. Say May 2001, right? That's where we are thinking. Now, I remember it very, very well because I was stood on the lawn outside a Hilton hotel. We had just presented why they should hire my company, very new company, over a half dozen or so very established training companies that they usually hired. And I had just been told, literally just been told, that they would not be hiring us for the Southeast region customer service experience training. But what caught my attention was the reason why they were not going to be giving me that job. And in today's session, we're going to be looking at storytelling, whether we're thinking of for a pitch, for talking with your team or the SLT, for sharing your vision, mission and values, all that good stuff. We'll be looking at some key reasons for why you've got to be telling more stories. We'll be looking at why people hold themselves back from telling stories. And I'm going to give you some very specific tips to make storytelling even easier. So let's get into this. Let me just move that there. And let's start to think about why we need to tell more stories first of all. And you probably know the answer to this, don't you? Because since our earliest days, stories are what we've used to make sense of the world. So think back hundreds of years, stories conveyed information. They conveyed fears and hopes and plans and information. And think about when you were little, right? Being told a story was brilliant. And the thing is, that desire to know what happens next doesn't leave us. And as we get older, we still use stories. We use stories to interact with others. When you are at work and you are telling your colleague about your holiday chaos, all you're doing there is telling a story. Very naturally, just sharing what happened and how awful it was. When you moan to your partner about the day you've just had, when you spend an entire evening trying to find exactly the right box set on whatever your preferred streaming service is, because you want to lose yourself in a story. And you have to say things like, I want something a bit exciting tonight, or I've had a bit of a rough day. I just want something that I don't have to think about. And it's that sense of losing yourself as somebody else tells you a story. And whether we think of a pre-filmed movie or whether you like reality TV, whether you like Britain's Got Talent, I think that's still a thing even. Whether you're a Bake Off fan, whether you like a good solid action story or a rom-com or whatever you're into, all of it is about storytelling. But the thing is, a lot of people in work think that storytelling is fluffy. They think it's inconsequential. But stories allow us to bring a lot of what we think forward. They allow us to bring the kinds of things that we want in presentation. So look on LinkedIn. Not now, clearly, please, at least stay to the end of the session. It's a 25-minute program, right? But look at how many people on their descriptions on LinkedIn will describe themselves as passionate about. I get excited about, I have a strong belief, I have a strong feeling. The problem is, it's just some written words. And how many people have you seen in a presentation who talk in terms of what's exciting, a new direction for the organization, a new initiative, for example, but there's no accompanying passion or belief? The great thing about stories is that quite naturally, stories just tend to bring out a performance. They tend to bring out a way of telling a story. When you're talking to your colleagues about your holiday disaster, you naturally bring all the passion and the excitement and the emotion of the event when you're explaining the story. And what I want you to understand is this, as we get into this program. When you think about the best speakers and the best presentation you've ever seen, think back the last 5, 10, 20 years, you can probably only think of a handful, right? And the ones that you remember, the ones that really moved you, the ones that you absolutely keyed into, they told you stories. There's no question about it. That's what they did. You never, I will challenge you now, you never came out of a presentation thinking, oh my gosh, that's completely affected my world. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to achieve this because of the font that they used on their PowerPoint. Did you? Nobody ever went forward wanting to change the world because the PowerPoint slides were so beautiful. So I'm stood on the lawn. And the reason they didn't want me to deliver this work to the Southeast region was because they wanted me to deliver the whole program to the entire UK Hilton Hotel estate. And I asked them, what did they like about us? I've got to be honest, at this stage, I was a little bit amazed. And they said it was very simple. They said that the other providers had all gone into great depth and detail about their logistics, about how big an organization they were, about how many people they had to service the particular requirements of the job, about how they were going to marshal their teams of writers and researchers and trainers to deliver all this. I had done none of that. I told them I could do it, but what I had done was I had told them stories. I had brought my pitch to life, demonstrating that I understood the issues that that business had at that time, that I understood what they wanted to do and where they wanted to go instead. Think about vision, mission, and values, right? So many organizations will spend a lot of time and money putting up posters and agencies, and they'll spend a fortune on comms activity. Now, that's all really good, but it doesn't really change anybody, does it? It doesn't really make anybody think, well, yeah, I'm into this. I'm going to get this. Imagine the difference if you could look at your teams, if you could look at your SLT in the eyes, and you could describe, if you could bring to life your big, audacious dream, your route map to success. Do you want to walk into the board and go, hi, thanks for giving me 10 minutes. Hi, I'm Bob. Right, so I'm going to be looking ahead to the next 3 years. Click, here's the slides. Oh, wrong slide, sorry. That's the slide. Do you want to be that person? Or do you want to be the person who walks into the board and go, what are the biggest threats facing our industry today? Because that grabs their attention straight away. You're going to tell them something, and you're delivering it in the way that we naturally deliver stories. Now, if all of this makes sense, and by the way, this does all make sense, the question is, why don't you use more stories currently? And what's on the screen right now are the things that everybody always says. Let's just burst a couple of these. I can't tell stories. Right, forgive me. That's nonsense. You can tell stories. I've just been demonstrating this. Everybody you know tells stories all of the time. Whether you are a go down the pub or the club person, whether you're a restaurant person, whether you're a sports person, whatever you're into, whatever your thing is when you're not working, you tell stories. You tell stories when you're cleaning the car on a Sunday morning to the neighbor. You chat about what's going on. You talk to your partner about this. That is storytelling, and we all indulge in it all of the time. But for some reason, we think we can't do it at work. We can. We absolutely can. The next excuse, and it is just an excuse, is the audience doesn't like stories. Now, there may be some limited truth to this with certain audiences. If you have an audience that you have tried telling stories to before, or you have a very specifically time critical audience, a board is a very obvious example, then we might want to tread a bit carefully. But what I can tell you is that in most cases, it's not that the audience doesn't like stories, it's that they haven't heard a good story, or somebody hasn't gone in and just gone, bang, there we go, here's what I want to share with you. Instead, they tend to pitter-patter around, half do a story, and then generally put their audience to sleep with slide after slide after slide of content, of Excel spreadsheets. When did you last change your mind because of an Excel spreadsheet or a big presentation? It's the story that takes us there. The story isn't suitable for this topic. Well, that is true in some cases, but in many cases, it just isn't. In many cases, what we've actually got to be able to understand is that all we need to do is to take the human elements, the thing that makes the change, the alteration, the difference, the little aha moment. See, why do things work or not work in your organization? Often it's because of the tiny choices people make on a given day-to-day situation. Why does health and safety, EHS, so often have a bad rap? It's because health and safety people often completely and fully explain the laws and the processes. But most of us think that's not going to affect me. I'll never do that. I'd never be that stupid. And yet, every year, some of us do. What we need to do is to find those little moments, those choices that people make. That then starts to become telling a story. And where do I get a story from? Stories all around you. Your experience, your colleague's experience, what your stakeholder told you this morning on the way to a meeting. There are stories everywhere. They don't need to be hilarious or funny or brilliant or witty or intelligent, or they can just be little moments of humanity, 15, 20, 30 seconds. I said this, she did that, da, 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 and I realized such and such. Now, I'll get a little bit more into how we do this in just a moment. By the way, I made up the last one. But there is often a perception that you need to be the best performer, the most incredible storyteller. You used to have the most incredible, witty and funny and brilliant stories. Well, all of that is a bonus. Of course it is. But it's not necessary, at least when we're starting. We just need to start with the basics of understanding we can use stories and they will work if we just start doing them. So, storytelling tips. We need a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this, of course, is a bit of a cliche. You gotta have a story, you gotta have a story, you gotta have a story. You must have a beginning, you must have a middle, you must have an end. There's an old joke about this in bad presentations, which is tell them how you're gonna bore them, then bore them, and then tell them how you just bored them. It remains true that we like the structure. We like the introduction, so we know what's going on. We like the perception of travel, journey, development, improvement, degradation. We like the outcome. And this is a very powerful structure that you could start using in your very next presentation. The past, the journey, the future. That's one way to see the beginning, the middle, and the end. Bad times. Just 1 year ago, we were here. Solution. This is what has happened. This is what's changed. Good times. Here's where we are now. That could model your proposal. You could do that in 3 minutes. You could do it in 60 seconds. You could do it as the basis of a 1-hour pitch. Clients, here is the situation that we've got currently. Bad times. There's my beginning. However, this is my solution. That is the body of your pitch. And here is my outcome. Here's the end. Here's the good times. You can do this very personally. When I started in this industry a year ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, da 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 da. Here's what happens. There's my middle. And where am I now? There's the end. One thing you must do, you must always look for the aha moments, the rewards, the moment when your audience goes, see what you did there. Because that's the moment that your audience feels payoff. They feel comfortable that they've heard something, they liked that little bit, and that's when our moment has landed. So beginning, middle, and end, that's not groundbreaking. You knew that, but you might not be using it that often. Let's go into a little bit more detail. Now, you might have come across the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell. Now, what's interesting about this is that whether or not you've heard of this as a structure, you've definitely seen some of the output of this. So the proposal was that the hero's return is a structure that lots of narratives and stories, whether films or plays or books, follow. Now, as with everything, there's always going to be exceptions. So some bits are dialed up, some bits are dialed down. But if we look through this, you'll understand why this is so compelling, and you'll understand how you've seen this in so many places. And you'll also understand why this is a slightly expanded version of beginning, middle, and end. If you understand this, you can start to structure bits of your presentation. Remember, we're not talking about storytelling for storytelling's sake. We're looking to win more business. We're looking to convince our SLT. We're looking to take our team with us. We're looking to satisfy our stakeholders with our proposal. We're using stories for highly commercial perspectives, and therefore we want them to be powerful, right? So the ordinary world, you can see that starts in part 1 over on blue there, the call to adventure. This is where the hero exists before their present story begins, and they don't know that there's an adventure coming. The call to adventure, they're confronted with a challenge, the refusal. Often they can't do it. They're scared, they're nervous, they're worried, they don't think they'll be able to do this. Things at the moment don't work for them. Let's move round into that next quarter, the purple quarter, the mentor or helper. So what now happens is somebody comes along, a mysterious person who's going to help that individual. They cross the threshold. This is where they actually move towards the adventure. So we're going to leave what we know and what we're comfortable with, and we're going to move into this dangerous area until we get to 6, tests, allies, and enemies. This is where now they've crossed the threshold. This is where there are new challenges. This is where they've got to learn the rules of the new world. As we move around, 7, the approach to the inmost cave. This is at last the edge of the dangerous place. This is where it all starts. The ordeal, great personal danger, rewards, they get the thing they're going for. And now 10, 11, and 12, the road back. We've got to make our way back to the ordinary world. Often it's called resurrection or atonement. There's a final moment, a final life or death. There's a final big lesson to be had here. And then 12, the return. This is the reward. Now, if that story sounds like you may have heard it before, it's because it's pretty much the plot to Star Wars. It's also pretty much the plot to Lord of the Rings. It's also Harry Potter. And it's Iron Man. And it's The Lion King. And. Now, of course, you can take a model and you can squeeze script into it if you make a few ups and downs in terms of bits you emphasize or de-emphasize. But the reason those stories are so successful is all of the things we've been speaking about so far. They've got the basic beginning, middle, and end. They use passion and excitement and emotion. We'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But they also follow the structure. We sense progress, challenge, difference, steps forward, steps back. You could do that in your next presentation. Rather than switching on your slides and going, hello, quick introduction for me, for those of you who don't know me, to put it into context, you can see the life slipping out of the ears of the audience in front of you. I'm not saying you have to be theatrical. I'm not saying you have to start, excuse me, you have to start creating some huge theatrical extravaganza. You do need to understand that stories are incredibly powerful. And taking just some of the elements here, you will get a considerably better output than if you don't. All right, let's move on and get into some more specific details about how you can use storytelling in your very next presentation. So we talked about beginning, middle, and ends. The next one is start with a hook. Let's learn from our predecessors. Now, we all think that we're super advanced these days. We've got the internet, got it on our phones. We can take photos and films and swap them around. We can look at PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets. Oh my goodness, haven't we achieved a lot? But let's back up a little bit. Because if our predecessors were walking through the woods and they saw a movement, what they wouldn't do is to start to consider, oh, I need to go and talk to that bear because a bear is what it is. I don't think I need to go and talk to that bear and check up on the organizational well-being of where that bear comes from. I'm going to need my slides for that. I need to talk about vision, mission, and values. Instead, what's going to happen is in your brain, and by the way, this is still exactly the same today, and bear with me on this bit. This bit is crucial. If you want your audience's attention, listen to this bit now. Base of the head. Top of the spine. There's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. It's the uptight little gatekeeper of the brain. And what its job is to do is to decide at any point, do I need to engage the higher powers of the brain, the bit that does the spreadsheets and the Excel? And it's a very simple process because all it's looking at is, do I need to run away from this or do I need to fight this? Do I need to eat this or do I need to mate with it? It's very, very simple. It's is there a threat? Is there a change? Is there movement? If so, then I will engage that. If not, I will tune out. Sound a little bit like some presentations you've been to, right? You tuning out in presentations is because there's not enough the reticular activating system to think, oh, hang on, I better listen to this bit. Now, thankfully, it doesn't involve being eaten by a bear. But when people go to presentations, they're concerned about being asked a question when they weren't listening. They're concerned about the meeting overrunning because they've got another meeting. They're concerned about the fact they didn't eat that bagel before they came into the meeting, and now they're really hungry and they don't know how long this one's going to go on. I mean, it's fairly minor compared to being eaten to a bear, but you get the point. This is why people tune out. We've got to start with a hook. I want you to pay attention to me right from the start. And this whole idea, the idea of a hook, is that we take things in a different direction right from the beginning, not quick introduction for those of you who don't know me, but where will our business be in 5 years if we don't implement what I'm about to recommend to you? Let me tell you. Okay, that sounds interesting. That sounds like I ought to listen. And your reticular activating system is going to engage with that. If you don't do that, you're fighting millions of years of evolution and you are not going to win. It's very, very simple. You must end with a payoff. I did say to you earlier on, there's got to be a aha moment. And I'm not saying you're here to be endlessly funny. You're not modeling yourself on a comedian, but think about how comedians do this. They will often start, why do jokes work, right? They start with a proposition. Here's the thing, here's the setup. The punchline is often that hook. It's that moment when you realize this wasn't going the way you thought it was. Two fish in a tank. One says to the other, can you drive this thing? Now, that is a great example of, I think we're going here. Oh, no, we're going here. And that moment, that realization is when the humor comes. We could do that in presentations, couldn't we? We could have a payoff that makes people go, oh, I like that. Let's move forward. The other powerful thing about telling stories is emotions tend to come naturally. So how does the story feel to you? Are you excited about it? Well, one of the worst things you can do is to stand up in front of your colleagues and go, I'm very excited to be here today. It's a waste of verbiage. It's not a particularly exciting hook, is it? Remember, we just spoke about a strong hook. If you're excited, look and sound it. Genuinely. You know how to do that. You've been excited before. Look and sound excited. If the thing's funny or shocking or sad or angry or funny, or whatever the emotion is, let that come out. Because when you're telling stories about the worst holiday experience, when you're telling stories about the terrible day you had at work, those emotions come out naturally. Allow it to happen. True story. I was once at a conference and the CEO stood up. And I am not exaggerating when I tell you the CEO literally did this. Right, good morning. Thank you all for being here. I have to tell you, this is a great moment in our company's history. And as I look around, I am so excited and blessed to be here. Literally, he did the whole thing like that. He was excited. He was blessed. None of it eked out. There's nothing wrong with allowing a little of that to come through. All right. You've also got to allow that people will see different bits of the same story. And that's okay. See, if you tell your story and people will take a different understanding from it, that's brilliant, because what's happening is they are now engaging with the content. That's what you want to do, right? So the Rolling Stones, you've heard of them back in the day when they were touring all the time, when they were young men, when they were always on TV, when they were always doing gigs. And of course, in those days, if you went on TV, you'd perform live. You might go on to another TV show. The whole video thing that we have now hadn't really been created. So it was very time intensive. And imagine if we were on a management program and you heard this story without any explanation, without introduction. So back in the day, they're all waiting for their audition. They're all waiting for their rehearsal, and they're getting a bit wound up because Charlie Watts, the drummer, hasn't arrived. And they're getting a bit irritated. And eventually, Mick Jagger goes to the telephone, calls the hotel, tell my drummer to get down here now. The whole room's a little bit fraught. It's a bit of an aggressive way of speaking. But anyway, an hour later, the door is thrown open, and Charlie is stood there, and he looks furious. Without a word, he strides straight up to Mick Jagger, smacks him in the face. Mick Jagger goes down. Charlie Watts stands over Mick Jagger and says, let's get one thing straight, Mick. I am not your drummer. You are my singer. Now, if you heard that on a management conference, would that be about communication? Would it be about silo working? Would it be about relationships and work? Would it be about clear reporting lines? Would it be about promotion? Actually, doesn't really matter so long as it's in the right ballpark. Too many people tell a story and say, I think what I like about that story is da 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 da. So don't introduce your story and do not explain the story you just told. The story has got to be strong enough to stand up on its own 2 feet. So we're pretty much there. This is that point. I said 20, 25, 26 minutes. That's where I said we're going to be. Now, I don't know if this is on the live version that you're watching right now, if you have questions for me. And even if you do, I don't know actually if I can see them, but we will see. I'm new to this tech here. But if you have questions for me, type them in right now. If not, I will thank you for being here at today's session. And I'll encourage you to like this video if you're on YouTube. I'm trying to do 2 things at the same time here. Okay, if you're on LinkedIn right now, please do just make a couple of comments and do let people know this has worked for you. Please also let me know what you think in the comments. Likewise, if you're watching this on YouTube, then it would be fantastic if you ensure you subscribe and like, follow, and all the good stuff. So I can't see other messages or notes coming in. I believe I'm supposed to see them here if they do, so I'm going to take that as a none for now, all of which is good. So thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Take it easy.